A wise man once said that history is written by the victor. In the case of space exploration, this certainly appears correct. By being the first to reach the moon, many see the United States as the victors of the space race. This leaves many Soviet accomplishments forgotten by the masses. This documentary aims to provide an insight into the Soviet side of the space race, touching on the accomplishments as well as the struggles of the Soviet space program.
Russia amazed the world with the successful launching of Sputnik 1, the Earth's first artificial satellite.
Man had his first great success in space when the Russians pushed a man across the threshold.
The Russians chalk up another victory in the space race as they put 2 manned spacecraft into orbit within 24 hours of each other.
This is Space Race, Behind the Curtain. Sputnik 1. The iconic satellite is world famous for being the first man-made object in space, and it signifies the Soviets' first efforts in the newly coined space race. The Soviets had been originally planning to launch a 1,000-kilogram satellite with 200 kilograms of scientific instruments on board. This satellite was referred to as Object D, but the extreme complexity of it delayed the launch, and Object D later became Sputnik 3. Sputnik 1 was hastily prepared in fear that the US would launch a satellite before the USSR, and was approved by the Council of Ministers on February 11, 1957. The launch, conducted on October 4, 1957, sparked worldwide curiosity. During the satellite's 21-day orbit, amateur radio operators worldwide could track the satellite's motion by hearing the quite beeping noise. Sputnik's battery ran out on October 26, but it continued to orbit until January 4, 1958, when it fell into Earth's orbit and burned up in the atmosphere.
Sputnik 1 carried few scientific instruments, but it did send back important data, which indicated to Russian scientists the possibility that life could survive in outer space. Now the Soviets wanted to know what effect this hostile environment would have upon the human body.
After shocking the world with Sputnik 1, the Soviets didn't waste much time before their next historical achievement, sending a living organism into orbit. The Soviets knew they wanted to eventually send a man into space, but the technology was still too primitive in 1957 to risk human life. So it was decided to send a dog first, and on November 3, 1957, Sputnik 2 was launched carrying the world's first cosmonaut, Laika. Laika was a 3-year-old stray mutt taken from the streets of Moscow to be trained for spaceflight. She was chosen for her calm demeanor and size. When news broke of Laika's launch, she became a sensation worldwide. However, what many people didn't know was that the capsule containing Laika was never designed for a safe return to Earth, and was built hastily in order to keep the world on its toes to further establish the Soviet Union as a world leader in spaceflight. Due to its expedient construction, it is believed that she only survived a few hours in space before she died a long and painful death due to overheating. As to not lose world support, the Soviet government was vague concerning the circumstances of Laika's death, claiming that she died peacefully by consuming poisoned dog food, even as going far to suggest that she survived a week in space. Though Laika's story is a sad one, her flight still served as an important benchmark for further space exploration, proved to the world that it was possible to survive in space, and provided scientists with much information on how to eventually safely send a man into space in the following years.
Laika was chosen to go on a journey from which she would never return, because Russian scientists had not yet solved the problem of recovering a satellite from outer space. Laika was to gain an immortality unlike that of any other dog in history. She and her special cabin were placed inside the nose cone of a giant Soviet missile. On November 3, 1957, Sputnik 2 was launched. Radio transmitters inside Sputnik 2 sent back valuable data from the first living creature to penetrate outer space. Laika's heartbeat, temperature, and rate of respiration were radioed to Earth and carefully studied. And then, after 1 week, Laika was dead.
On April 12, 1961, Vostok 1 was launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying with it the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. He and his craft orbited the Earth a single time before the retro rockets fired, causing the craft to descend back into Earth's atmosphere over Egypt, then touching down in Saratov, USSR. 2 Russian schoolgirls saw the landing and were then later calmed by Gagarin, explaining that he was a Soviet citizen. Afterwards, Yuri was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. Yuri then toured throughout the USSR as a celebrity and national icon. The US saw this as a challenge and quickly began to catch up. The successful launch of Vostok 1 and safe return of Yuri Gagarin added to an increasing lead by the Soviets over the United States. But not even a month later, on May 5th, Alan Shepard piloted Freedom 7 to become the second person and first American in space. Unlike Gagarin, Shepard's flight was ballistic, or suborbital, and he did not make a full orbit around the Earth. On May 25th, President John F. Kennedy made his famous address to Congress, saying that the nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before the decade was out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. The nation had been successfully challenged, and the space race was on. On February 20th, 1962, the United States launched Friendship 7. Inside was John Glenn, the first American to successfully orbit the Earth. The United States had tied up with the Soviets for the first time, but the Russians still had an ace up their sleeve.
Project Mercury, the country's first manned spaceflight program, was given the go-ahead just 1 week after NASA was formed on October 1st, 1958.
1975 was without a doubt one of the most important years of the 20th century. Thatcher became Prime Minister of the UK, Saigon fell to the North Vietnamese, and the space race would finally come to an end. A détente, or easing of tensions, was occurring between the US and the Soviet Union. In order to further grow the peace, both nations sought to band together in the pursuit of science and prosperity. On July 17th, the Soyuz and Apollo flights docked together, an achievement in itself. 2 Soviet cosmonauts and 3 American astronauts conversed together, exchanged gifts, and even ate meals. Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov would go on later to say that 3 languages were spoken during this meeting: English, Russian, and Oklahomsky, poking fun at astronaut Thomas Stafford's pronounced drawl. The crews would go on later to perform a number of joint and independent experiments, and the crews departed after being joined for 44 hours. This mission not only represented a scientific victory, but a political one in a time of such strife. In the success of this joint mission, they would be later influenced when planning the global project of the International Space Station.
The Apollo-Soyuz project, a joint endeavor between the Soviet Union and the United States, was launched in 1975. The mission called for a mutual docking and crew exchange to develop the necessary equipment for international space rescues.